Crystal says, hey, Ben, what would you say is the best evidence for God? What gives you a reason to believe? Thanks for all you do. My husband and I listen to your show every day and discuss it together. We're big fans. So I'm writing a book on this. The best evidence for God, as I have said on the show before, and as I say in Debate with Sam Harris, which I think is going to, he'll be putting that out pretty soon if he hasn't already. The basic idea is that if you believe in free will, if you believe in human reason, if you believe in our capacity to understand the universe, if you believe in a predictable universe with laws that govern it, if you believe we do not live in a chaotic universe without meaning, if you believe that you can derive aught from is, then you need to believe in a divine creator. Okay, and that's not an argument for the Bible, but that is an argument for God, right? That's the Aristotelian argument for God, is that there is a rationale behind everything. If you believe there's a rationale behind everything, then you believe in God. And if you believe, as Aquinas did, that rationale is purely actual, right? Here's sort of the argument that Aristotle makes. The argument that Aristotle makes for the unmoved mover is not that everything has a cause and therefore there's God, because then leftists and atheists just say, well, does God have a cause also, right? The idea is that everything that you see in front of you at one point was another thing that was actualized, right? There's that something has potential, and there's the potential and the actual, right? Like this piece of paper right here, this has the potential to be ash, but it requires fire in order to make it ash. Now, fire itself also had a potential at one point, right? It was a match, and it was a piece of wood, or it was a rough surface. So it had the potential to be fire, but it was not fire. So in order for something to become actual, in order for potential to be actualized, it has to be acted upon by something that is either fully actual or something that is a combination of the actual with its own potential. The idea here would be that there is something that lies behind everything that is purely actual, right? It is actuality itself. It is the most actual thing. And this thing cannot be material, because if it were material, then it would have potential for change, right? It doesn't have potential for change. Therefore, it is purely actual. And that pure actuality also is all-knowing, because anything that exists has to come from a place of capacity for being actualized. And so it's the unactualized actualizer is the way that God would be put. If you want to read a good book about proofs of God, then Edward Fazer is a book I've recommended on the show. He has 5 proofs for the existence of God, quite a good book, and I recommend you check it out. Good Christmas read, actually. I would recommend that you check that out. Again, I think what it comes down to in the end is you either believe there's a purpose and meaning in human life or you don't. If you don't, you may end up an atheist. If you do, you're going to end up at God no matter how you slice it. And any attempts to avoid that, which is the debate I had with Sam Harris, any attempts to avoid that conclusion are bound to fall short. Right.
Now, it's interesting to bring up the religiosity, the conversion to orthodoxy for your family, because I think there's a prevailing ethos that religious people are a little stupider or naive or unthoughtful or intentionally unthoughtful. In my own experience, I find people who are not educated or necessarily intelligent can be quite religious. And I've found that people who are extraordinarily intelligent or educated can be quite religious and often are. And then there's this middle ground of total atheism.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the reason that's right is because a lot of people who are hardcore atheists, I'm not talking about agnostics, because I think the only evidence-based position on God is agnosticism.
Sure,
because there's no other evidence of any, like you can go either way. But as far as kind of hardcore atheists, a lot of atheists who are very hardcore and very vocal about it, they seem to think they're the first people who ever figured out that like a virgin birth is kind of unlikely, or that God speaking from a mountaintop is kind of weird. Like there's people this ever occurred to in the history of humanity. Like it's brand new. No one's ever thought of this. Or they'll talk about the problem of theodicy, and they'll sit around going, well, I had a friend who died of cancer when they were young. How could a good God allow this? I'll bet no religious thinkers ever talked about that. It's like there's 2,500 years of religious thought on exactly this topic.
It is incredible that people will bring up this question as a trump card.
Right.
They'll say, well, why would a good God let bad things happen? And you think, you're not asking me that. You could Google it, and you would get eternal books about this.
Right, and they may not satisfy you, but the idea that there's no sort of explanation for that any religious person has ever thought. Like, they expect me to convert on the spot. You're right, now I'm an atheist because you dropped that on me. No, I mean, most religious people have doubts. Most religious people understand that there's a difference between faith and knowledge. That's why it's called faith. Right? That's why it's called belief. You're a believer, right? You're not a knower, you're a believer. And there's a clip of me saying that I know in God, but I didn't say I know God, right? I said I know in God, because no human being is capable of knowing God. I know the place of humanity in the world because I believe there is a God, but I think that is a different standard than religious person who never even thinks about whether God exists or what God wants from us. I think that It's written right into the Bible. I mean, I think that the key moment in biblical history, there are a bunch of them that people sort of point out in the Old Testament anyway. The key moment for Christians is very easy, but for Jews, there are a couple.
There's just one. I guess two. There's the birth and the death and resurrection.
Right,
but
exactly.
It's very simple.
It really boils down in the sequel. In the sequel, they really boil it down. But in the original, there are a few different sort of points that people use as inflection points. Sacrifice of Isaac, the Exodus from Egypt. But I think that the real key moment is a quieter moment, because this is the moment when Israel is actually founded, and that is the wrestling match between Jacob and the angel. Right, that's when Jacob's name is switched to Israel. That's the first time that Israel is used in the Bible and that becomes the foundation of all of religion. And Yisrael literally means struggle with God. Right, it says right in the Chumash, it says right there in the Bible that this means, and you struggled with God and overcame. That's what religious people do every day. We struggle with the goodness of God, the presence of God, the immanence of God. We struggle with that all the time. If you're not struggling, you're not thinking about it. And God wants you to struggle with that, because if you're struggling with it, then it means there's a baseline level of belief. You don't struggle with things that you think are imaginary. You don't struggle with Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny.
But you struggle with your wife. You struggle with your family. You struggle with people that you love, that you have a relationship with.
Exactly.
Do you think, because all the time we hear, especially from young conservatives, well, I'm fiscally conservative but socially liberal. Well, I just want to focus on policy that works. And there seems to be a metaphysical ignorance or a neglect of metaphysics.
I agree.
Do you think that there needs to be a metaphysical basis for conservatism?
I think that if you want to think it through for more than 5 minutes, yes. Because I think that you can live in the political world and not really think about the bases of your thought. But, I mean, it's fascinating always when you talk to people who aren't religious or who disparage the Judeo-Christian tradition upon which this entire culture was built. And they'll use Judeo-Christian terms, right? They'll use Judeo-Christian definitions of good and evil. They'll use Judeo-Christian notions of rights that don't exist in the absence of Judeo-Christian culture, right? They don't exist anywhere else on planet Earth for all time.
Right.
And the idea that you haven't really thought these things through, it's dangerous. I mean, every political philosophy is based on a certain conception of human nature and humanity's place in the world and human value more than anything else. I mean, the foundational statement for all of Western civilization is the very beginning of Genesis, that God is made in man, that man is made in God's image.
Right.
Once you do that, you can talk about the value of man, the rights of man, what is man put here to do. But if you don't believe any of that, if you just believe that man is sort of a random assemblage of atoms that happened along, because the universe is random and there are lots of iterations of it, then I find a hard time making the moral argument against, for example, things like slavery or abortion or tyranny or murder even. I mean, like...
or capital punishment on the flip side.
Capital punishment. I mean, if you are basically just an ant, unless you're a Jainist and you believe all forms of life should equally be protected, but that's a religion too. If you believe like a secular version of that, then okay, I guess I buy it. But otherwise, you have to explain what makes human beings special and why is that specialness worthy of protection.
It does lead to this, what it seems to me, disingenuous determinism. That seems to be the logical conclusion of that materialist thinking. But
and disingenuous is the right word, because I think that what ends up happening, it's very weird, is when you talk to a lot of people who are atheists. Like I read Sam Harris's books, and I've met Sam, and I think Sam's a smart guy. And when I read what Sam has to say, a lot of what he has to say is based on just an assumption of free will. There's an assumption that you can choose otherwise, that you are in control of your own life, and that you should live a moral life, that he has constructed for you his version of what morality looks like. Alan Dershowitz sort of has a similar model. And the problem is, where are you getting this free will stuff in a materialistic universe in which you're just a random assemblage of atoms? Like, where is this free will coming from? Where do you get that? And how do you square that with a materialist version of reality? I think that the best proof of God, I've always said this, I think the best proof of God to me is sort of a Cartesian notion that you are a thinker, you are a being.
I can acknowledge myself.
Right. You are a self, right? You're not just a random assemblage of stuff that wakes up new every morning, and that if you have a hamburger, you're a different person than you were 1 minute before because you just put some new stuff in your body, right? The notion that you are a coherent human being with the capacity to think and the capacity to control your behavior and the capacity to change, that's the basis of all of civilization. You take away that basic Augustinian notion of free will, and it's all over.
I couldn't agree more. So you've read all the books. You've read St. Augustine and Descartes and all these people. Most people haven't read all the books. If you're a young conservative, either you're on campus or you're in high school or something, you want to join the vast right-wing conspiracy, you want to get your card. I keep mine in my wallet all the time. What should you do? What should you... And I don't just mean what books you should read. Obviously, you should do that too. But what should the would-be young conservative be doing right now?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing you should do is work hard. I think working hard is basically the first notion in any conservative philosophy. If you are willing to work hard for your own betterment, then you're already moving in the right direction politically because you're an individual who feels you need to better yourself. You're not just a piece of garbage in a collection. So if you value yourself enough to work hard, then I think that you're going to move in a conservative direction sort of automatically. I think that, in terms of reading, obviously you should read the same texts that were good enough for Lincoln. I mean, if you read the Bible and Shakespeare and follow that up with the Federalist Papers, I think you start with those three, and you'll be in pretty good shape. A root respect for Western civilization lies at the core of conservative philosophy, which is why there is something we want to conserve and something the left wants to tear down. So if you have a respect for these institutions of Western civilization and you say, yes, they were flawed, and yes, it's our goal to perfect them and make sure that the original aspirations are fulfilled generation over generation, improved over time, then we can make purer what we were given. But that's not quite the same thing as what the left is saying, which is that what we were given is garbage, and if we just discard that, we can build something brand new. I mean,
just wait till I get my hands on it. I'm going to do great.
Yeah, exactly. The last couple centuries, as someone said to me on Sunday night, the last couple centuries have been very poor proof of the idea that secular humanism has a great record in remaking man in a positive direction. Like that argument would have swung a lot better in 1788, right?
Absolutely
Before
true.
the French Revolution, it works a lot better.
We have to talk a little bit about politics.